The smell of burnt circuits and my own blood fills this cramped escape pod, and I know I have maybe an hour before life support fails completely. So let me tell you about the coordinates, the ones that destroyed everything I believed in, that killed the woman I loved, that proved the Empire's perfect order was built on a foundation of impossible lies. My name is Davron Kellis, and I was the best astrogation specialist the Imperial Navy ever produced, which means I was complicit in more deaths than I can count. And now, drifting in the void between Scarif and nowhere, I need someone to know the truth before the oxygen runs out and I join the millions whose coordinates I calculated with such prideful precision. I was born on Karulag in the year 29 BBY, which means I came into the galaxy just as the Republic was beginning its slow collapse into the Clone Wars, though I was too young to understand what that meant. My father was a shipping logistics coordinator for a mining consortium, my mother a mathematics professor at the regional academy, and from both of them I inherited an obsessive love of numbers, of patterns, of the clean elegance of equations that described the movement of stars and ships through the infinite dark. Our apartment overlooked one of Karulag's major spaceports, and I'd spend hours watching vessels arrive and depart, tracking their vectors, imagining the hyperspace calculations that had brought them there, feeling something like religious awe at the mathematics underlying every journey. My childhood smelled like my mother's tea, and the ozone from my father's data terminals tasted like the sweet pastries he'd bring home when a particularly complex shipping route had been successfully optimized. They were good people, I think, though the Empire would later classify them as politically unreliable for reasons I never fully understood. My father would sometimes make comments about Republic corruption, about how the bureaucracy had grown bloated and inefficient, and after the Clone Wars ended and Palpatine declared himself Emperor, he seemed cautiously optimistic that perhaps strong central authority could restore order to the chaos. My mother was quieter about politics, but I remember her crying the day the Holonet reported the Jedi Temple burning, though she never explained why. I was 12 when they disappeared. The Imperial Security Bureau came in the middle of the night. I remember the harsh pounding on our door, the smell of their leather gloves, the cold efficiency with which they searched our apartment for evidence of seditious materials. They found nothing because there was nothing to find, but they took my parents anyway, and the last thing my father said to me was, "Remember your mathematics, Davron. Numbers don't lie. Whatever they tell you, numbers don't lie." I was processed into a state education facility for children of detained persons, and I never saw my parents again. The official record states they died in a detention facility riot 6 months later. I learned not to ask questions about what that meant. The state facility was brutal in its efficiency, not cruel for cruelty's sake, but coldly systematic in its transformation of parentless children into useful Imperial citizens. We were tested constantly, evaluated for aptitudes and weaknesses, sorted and categorized and assigned to educational tracks that would maximize our value to the Empire. I excelled at mathematics and spatial reasoning, could visualize three-dimensional hyperspace geometries in my head with an ease that shocked my instructors. By 14, I was solving navigation problems that Academy graduates struggled with. By 16, I'd been accepted into the Imperial Naval Academy on Coruscant, with full honors and a direct pipeline to the astrogation corps. I threw myself into the work because the alternative was thinking about my parents, about the empty space where my childhood had been, about the fact that I was utterly alone in a galaxy that had demonstrated with casual cruelty that individual lives mattered less than order and efficiency. The Academy smelled like floor polish and ambition, tasted like the recycled water we drank by the liter while studying through the night. I learned orbital mechanics and hyperspace mathematics, gravitational tensors and Navi computer programming, the thousands of intricate details that separated a successful jump from a catastrophic collision with a stellar mass shadow. I learned that space was not empty but threaded with invisible pathways, that hyperspace was a dimension that could be navigated with sufficient precision, that the galaxy could be mapped and mastered by those with the intelligence and dedication to do so. My instructors called me gifted. They meant I was useful. I graduated second in my class. The first place belonged to a Coruscanti noble's son who had connections I lacked and was assigned to the navigation department of the Star Destroyer Imperator, one of the newest and most prestigious vessels in the fleet. I was 19 years old, an ensign with promise, standing on the bridge of a warship that stretched more than a kilometer from bow to stern, feeling the thrum of the hyperdrive through the deck plates, and I thought I'd found my place in the universe. I thought the Empire's order meant something. I thought my parents would have been proud, or if not proud, at least satisfied that I'd survived and found purpose. The Imperator smelled like recycled air, and the faint, acrid scent of overtaxed systems sounded like the constant hum of equipment and the clicking of boots on Durasteel decks. I worked in the Navigation Center, a cathedral of holographic displays and computing equipment where teams of specialists plotted courses for the Star Destroyer and its escort vessels. Every jump to hyperspace required precise calculations. You had to account for gravitational fields, mass shadows, the changing positions of celestial bodies, the quirks of individual Navy computers. A single decimal error could send a ship into a star or leave it stranded in interstellar space. We calculated lives and deaths without ever seeing the faces involved, and we took pride in our accuracy. My supervisor was Commander Thrin, a career navigation officer in his 50s who'd served since the Clone Wars. He taught me that astrogation wasn't just mathematics, it was an art. An intuition built on years of experience with how hyperspace actually behaved versus how the equations predicted it should. The numbers are your foundation, he'd say, tapping the displays with a calloused finger. But there's always something the numbers don't capture. Mass shadows that aren't on the charts, gravitational anomalies. Hyperspace itself shifts like an ocean current. You need to feel it, not just calculate it. I didn't understand what he meant then. I trusted the mathematics absolutely, believed that sufficient precision would account for every variable, that the universe operated according to comprehensible laws. I was 21 when I met Mira Voss. She was a junior communications officer, transferred to the Imperator from a patrol frigate. With dark hair she wore in violation of regulation length and eyes that held a wariness I recognized from my own mirror. We met in the officers' mess during a long transit through the Outer Rim, and she sat across from me without asking permission and said, "You're the navigation prodigy everyone talks about. Tell me something, do you ever think about where we're sending people when we plot these courses?" The question unsettled me because I'd trained myself not to think about it. "I calculate optimal routes," I said. "What happens at the destination isn't my responsibility." "Isn't it?" She had this way of looking at you like she could see through whatever armor you'd built. "We're part of the machine, Davron. Every calculation, every course, every precise little number contributes to what the Empire does with its reach. You can't separate the mathematics from the consequences." I should have reported her for seditious comments. Instead, I found myself seeking her out, drawn to someone who questioned things I'd taught myself to accept. We'd meet in empty observation lounges during off shifts, floating regulations by being alone together, and she'd tell me about the worlds she'd seen, planets pacified by star destroyers, populations relocated by imperial decree, the grinding machinery of order imposed at blaster point. I'd defend the Empire, argue that chaos was worse than tyranny, that individual suffering was acceptable if it prevented galactic-scale war. She'd listen with that penetrating gaze and say, "You're smarter than this. You're just choosing not to see." I fell in love with her slowly, the way you fall asleep, not noticing until you're already gone. She tasted like the contraband calf she somehow acquired, smelled like the soap from the officers' quarters, and when she touched my hand, her skin was warm against the cold metal of the ship around us. We began an affair that violated fraternization protocols, stealing hours in maintenance corridors and empty cargo bays. And for the first time since my parents disappeared, I felt like something in my life was mine rather than the Empire's. She'd trace the tension in my shoulders and whisper, "You're allowed to be angry about what they took from you. You're allowed to feel." But I wasn't. Anger was inefficient. Feeling was a distraction from duty. The first time I encountered coordinates that didn't process correctly, I thought it was a simple Navy computer error. We were plotting a course to the Mustafar system for a high-priority Imperial meeting. This was about 6 months into my assignment on the Imperator, and the standard jump calculations kept returning error codes I'd never seen. The mathematics was sound, the route was clear, but the Navy computer refused to accept the coordinates, kept flagging them as invalid destination parameters. I ran diagnostics for 3 hours, checking every system, every variable, every possible source of computational error. Everything tested functional. The coordinates should have worked. Commander Thrin came to check on my progress and found me staring at the error messages with growing frustration. "Having trouble with Mustafar?" he asked, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. "The Navi computer won't accept the coordinates, sir, but I can't find any computational errors." He was quiet for a moment, then leaned over and entered an override code I'd never seen, bypassing the automated validation systems. The coordinates accepted immediately, and the route plotted without further complaint. "There are certain destinations," he said carefully, "where the navigation systems require manual override. It's a security feature, not a flaw. Don't mention this in your logs." I wanted to ask why. Wanted to understand what could make a perfectly valid set of coordinates trigger errors that required secret override protocols. But Thrin's expression warned me not to pursue it, and I'd learned as a child in the state facility that some questions were dangerous. So I noted the override code in my personal records and tried to forget the incident. Tried and failed, because it was the first crack in my belief that Imperial systems operated according to rational, consistent principles. The incidents accumulated slowly, a destination in the unknown regions that caused the Navy computer to shut down entirely until we physically replaced its memory core. Coordinates for a black site prison that required 3 different override codes and still generated quantum calculation errors that should have been mathematically impossible. A research facility whose location existed in the charts but triggered cascading system failures whenever we attempted to plot a direct route. Each time I'd bring the problem to Thrin, and each time he'd have a workaround, an override, an explanation that didn't quite explain anything. "Imperial security measures," he'd say, "classified protocols, need-to-know basis." Ensign. I started keeping personal records of these anomalies, not to expose them, but because I couldn't solve a problem I didn't understand, and I needed to understand. I documented the error codes, the override procedures, the specific coordinates that triggered system failures. I compared them to known hyperspace hazards, gravitational anomalies, anything that might explain why valid coordinates produced invalid results. I found patterns I couldn't explain, clusters of prohibited destinations that formed no logical grouping, routes that should have been viable but registered as navigational impossibilities. Mira noticed my obsession. "You're doing it again," she'd say, finding me hunched over datapads in our stolen hours together. "Trying to make sense of something you're not supposed to question. The mathematics should be consistent," I'd insist. "There shouldn't be coordinates that are simultaneously valid and invalid. Destinations that exist but can't be navigated to. It doesn't make sense." "Maybe that's the point." She'd pull the datapad from my hands, force me to look at her. "Maybe there are things the Empire doesn't want people finding, and the easiest way to hide them is to make the navigation systems pretend they don't exist. That would require corrupting the fundamental mathematics." "Devron," her voice was gentle, "you think the Empire wouldn't corrupt mathematics if it served their purposes? They corrupt everything else." I didn't want to believe her, couldn't afford to believe her, because if she was right, then everything I'd built my life on was compromised. The clean elegance of numbers, the objective truth of equations, the rational order I'd embraced to replace the chaotic loss of my parents, all of it was potentially corrupted by Imperial manipulation. So I pushed the thought away and focused on my work, calculating jumps and plotting courses and telling myself that the occasional anomaly was just a security measure, nothing more sinister than protecting classified locations from unauthorized access. I was promoted to lieutenant at 23, assigned as Assistant Chief of Navigation aboard the Imperator May. Commander Thrin retired, medical discharge for reasons that were never fully explained, and I inherited his position 6 months later. I was 24 years old, responsible for all navigation operations on a Star Destroyer, with a staff of 15 specialists and access to navigation databases that required security clearances I'd spent years earning. I thought I'd achieved something, thought I'd climbed high enough to see the truth of things, to understand the systems I served. I was catastrophically wrong. The deeper access revealed more anomalies, not fewer, entire sectors of space that existed in survey data, but were flagged as navigational hazards despite no evidence of actual hazards. Routes that had been used for millennia suddenly marked as prohibited with no explanation, and most disturbingly, coordinates that appeared in operational orders but couldn't be found in any official star charts, as if someone had carefully erased them from every database while still requiring ships to travel there. I brought these inconsistencies to the Imperator's executive officer, Captain Varen, expecting clarification. He looked at my compiled data, looked at me, and said flatly, "These are matters of Imperial security, Lieutenant. Your job is to navigate the ship to assigned destinations, not to question the navigation database integrity. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir. But if the databases are corrupted..." "The databases are not corrupted. They are operating exactly as designed." "Dismissed, Lieutenant." That phrase, "operating exactly as designed," haunted me for weeks. It implied that the inconsistencies weren't errors but features, that the Imperial navigation systems were intentionally constructed to hide certain locations, to make certain coordinates unprocessable, to ensure that even highly cleared navigation officers like myself couldn't access complete information about the galaxy we were supposedly mapping. The implications were staggering. How many worlds existed that the Empire had erased from official records? How many routes, how many destinations, how many entire populations might be hidden in the gaps between what the Navi computers acknowledged and what actually existed? I started cross-referencing civilian navigation databases, old Republic-era star charts, independent surveyor data, even black market astrogation files that Mira helped me acquire through channels I didn't ask about. The discrepancies were impossible to ignore. Whole systems that appeared in century-old charts but had vanished from Imperial records. Coordinates that civilian navigators used routinely but that triggered lockouts in military Navy computers. It was systematic erasure, comprehensive and deliberate, as if the Empire was actively rewriting the map of the galaxy to hide things it didn't want found. "You need to stop this," Mira warned me one night, holding me while I shook with the implications of what I was discovering. "You're treading on things that get people disappeared, things that got your parents disappeared." "My parents weren't involved in navigation analysis." "Your father was a logistics coordinator. He worked with shipping routes, with cargo manifests, with the movement of goods across sectors. You don't think he might have noticed the same inconsistencies you're finding now? You don't think maybe that's why the ISB took him?" Her voice was fierce, frightened. "This is dangerous knowledge, Devron. The Empire doesn't allow people to see the full map because the full map would reveal too much about what they're hiding." I knew she was right. Knew I should delete my personal research, forget the anomalies, focus on my assigned duties, but I couldn't. The numbers didn't lie, my father had said, and the numbers were telling me that the Empire's version of reality was fundamentally dishonest, that the order I'd devoted myself to was built on carefully maintained ignorance. I had to understand, had to follow the mathematics to wherever it led, even if it destroyed me. The coordinates that changed everything appeared in an operational order 18 months ago, 41 standard months before this escape pod became my coffin. The Imperator was assigned to support a classified Imperial research facility designated only as Project Starhawk, location provided as a set of coordinates that immediately triggered every error protocol I'd documented. The Navi computer refused to process them, flagged them as invalid, shut down 3 times before I could even complete the preliminary calculations. I'd seen problematic coordinates before, but never anything like this. It was as if the navigation system was actively resisting acknowledging this destination existed. I used every override code I'd accumulated, every workaround I'd learned, and still couldn't make the system accept the jump parameters. Finally, I had to manually calculate the entire route, bypassing the Navy computer entirely, using pure mathematics and century-old astrogation techniques that predated automated navigation. It took me 16 hours of continuous work, cross-checking figures until my eyes burned and my hands cramped, but I plotted a viable course. When I presented it to Captain Varen, he looked at the calculations and said, "How did you generate these without Navi computer assistance?" "The Navi computer couldn't process the coordinates, sir. I had to calculate manually." Something flickered in his expression. Concern, maybe, or calculation. "And you were able to determine the destination successfully?" "Yes, sir. It's approximately 40 parsecs beyond the outer rim, in a region that's not included in standard charts, but appears viable for hyperspace transit." "I see." He was quiet for a long moment. "Lieutenant Kellis, you are not to discuss these coordinates with anyone outside command staff. You will not log them in your personal records. You will not attempt to research the destination or its purpose. You will calculate our route, oversee the jump, and then forget these coordinates ever existed. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." But I was already memorizing them, burning them into my brain, because something that required this much concealment had to be significant. We jumped 3 days later, and the transition to hyperspace felt wrong in ways I'd never experienced. There was always some turbulence entering hyperspace, a moment of disorientation as your ship slipped into that other dimension where faster-than-light travel was possible. But this was different, a sensation of resistance, like pushing through something viscous, accompanied by a high-pitched whine from the hyperdrive that engineering couldn't explain. Several crew members reported nausea and disorientation. 2 Navy computer systems suffered cascading failures that required complete memory wipes. And I felt something I can only describe as wrongness, a sense that we were traveling to a place that shouldn't exist, that reality itself was strained by our destination. We emerged from hyperspace in a region of space that looked like every other region of space. Stars scattered across the infinite dark, distant nebulae painting clouds of color against the void. Except there was a planet here, orbiting a star that didn't appear in any Imperial chart I'd ever seen. And in orbit around that planet was a facility that dwarfed even the star destroyers surrounding it. The structure was massive, geometric, bristling with communications arrays and defense platforms. Clearly Imperial construction, but unlike anything in the published fleet schematics. Project Starhawk, I assumed. And I wasn't supposed to wonder what it was for. We remained in-system for 6 days while the Imperator provided security for supply transfers and personnel rotation. I wasn't cleared to know what happened on that station, but I could see the ships coming and going, transports with certain configurations, vessels that suggested research rather than military applications. And I noticed something else. The communications traffic was encrypted with protocols I'd never encountered, routed through relays that didn't appear in any Imperial communications network I had access to. This facility was hidden not just geographically but informationally, isolated from the rest of the Empire's infrastructure as completely as if it existed in another galaxy. On the 4th day, Mira managed to get assigned to a communications detail aboard the station. She came back 8 hours later looking like she'd aged 8 years, her face pale and her hands trembling. I found her in our usual hiding place, a maintenance corridor in the Imperator's lower decks, and she collapsed into my arms, shaking. "What did you see?" I asked, already dreading the answer. I can't talk about it. If they knew I understood what—" She was crying, something I'd never seen her do. "We have to leave. We have to find a way off this ship, out of the military, somewhere the Empire can't find us." "What did you see?" I asked again, more insistent. She looked at me with eyes that had witnessed something that broke her. They're erasing people, not just killing them, erasing them, taking entire populations from worlds that resist Imperial control and bringing them here, using them for research, for experiments, things that would make the Clone Wars look humane by comparison. And then they're deleting all record that those people ever existed, removing their worlds from the charts, making it as if they never were. This whole facility is dedicated to making Imperial atrocities mathematically impossible, because if the destinations don't officially exist, the crimes committed there can't be proven. I felt cold despite the ambient temperature. That's why the navigation systems can't process these coordinates. They've built the erasure into the fundamental infrastructure. Yes, she gripped my arms, and now you know. Now we both know, which means we're already dead unless we run. We should have run, should have deserted that night, stolen a shuttle, jumped to some lawless sector where the Empire's reach was weak. But I was still trapped by my belief that knowledge could protect me, that if I documented what I'd discovered, if I gathered sufficient evidence, I could expose this to someone who mattered, someone who'd care that the Empire was literally rewriting reality to conceal its atrocities. I was brilliant with mathematics and catastrophically naive about power. I spent the next year collecting evidence while pretending perfect loyalty. I documented every anomalous coordinate, every navigation system irregularity, every instance where the mathematics of reality contradicted the official Imperial version. I cross-referenced classified destination codes with civilian reports of worlds that had gone silent, building a map of erasure that showed the systematic scope of what the Empire was doing. I was meticulous, thorough, everything my parents and my training had taught me to be. I was building a case that I thought would matter, that I thought someone would act on, If only they knew the truth. Mira begged me to stop. Information without power is just martyrdom, she'd say. You can't expose them because there's no authority higher than the Empire to expose them to. The system is working exactly as intended. Your documentation just makes you more dangerous to them, more necessary to eliminate. Then we get the information to the rebellion, I argued. They could use this. Proof of imperial atrocities, locations of black sites, evidence of systematic erasure of entire populations. This could change things. Or it could get us killed before we can transmit a single byte. But she helped me anyway because she loved me, because she'd decided that if we were going to die for this, we might as well die trying to do something that mattered. We made our attempt 6 months ago. The Imperator was docked at a shipyard over Kuat for refit, and I'd identified a secure communications relay that I could splice into, one that would let me transmit my compiled data to known rebellion frequencies before the ISB could trace and block it. We waited for a shift change, accessed the communications node using Mira's authentication codes, and I began uploading everything I'd gathered. Star charts, coordinates, evidence of destinations erased from Imperial records, documentation of the facility I'd designated Starhawk, testimony about what Mira had witnessed there. The upload was 63% complete when the alarms began screaming. ISB counterintelligence had detected the transmission, locked down the shipyard, and dispatched security teams to our location. We ran through maintenance corridors and cargo bays, the smell of my own fear sweat mixing with the recycled air, the sound of boots and shouted orders echoing behind us. We almost made it to the docking bay where we'd prepared an escape shuttle. Almost. Mira was hit by blaster fire in a narrow corridor 50 meters from the shuttle. I felt her fall more than saw it, spun around to find her crumpled against the bulkhead with a smoking wound in her back. I tried to lift her, tried to carry her, but she pushed me away with blood on her lips and said, "Go, finish the upload, make it matter." Those were her last words before the stormtroopers rounded the corner and I ran because I was a coward, because some part of me still believed survival was possible, because I couldn't make myself die with her, even though that would have been the honorable choice. I reached the shuttle, launched with security ships pursuing, jumped to hyperspace with half-computed coordinates that should have torn my ship apart but somehow didn't. I spent 3 days in hiding in the Outer Rim, mourning Mira, hating myself for leaving her, trying to figure out how to complete what we'd started. The partial upload I'd managed wouldn't be enough. Too fragmentary, too easily dismissed as fabrication. I needed to get the complete data to someone who could use it, needed to make Mira's death mean something more than just another erasure. I made for Scarif. I'd intercepted intelligence suggesting the Empire kept comprehensive archives there, including navigation records that might corroborate my evidence. If I could infiltrate the facility, access their data vaults, complete my documentation with Imperial records that proved the erasure was systematic and intentional, then transmit everything to the rebellion, maybe then it would matter. Maybe then Mira wouldn't have died for nothing. I arrived at Scarif 3 days ago during what turned out to be the largest rebellion assault on an Imperial facility in years. The battle was chaos. Rebel ships engaging the orbital shield gate, ground teams fighting through the facility, the entire garrison mobilized to repel the attack. I used the confusion to slip through their defenses, accessed the navigation archives using credentials I'd retained, and found exactly what I'd hoped for and feared. Comprehensive logs of every deleted coordinate, every erased destination, every systematic redaction of reality the Empire had implemented. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of locations, entire populations, unmade in the service of maintaining the fiction of Imperial order. I compiled everything, all my research plus the Imperial archives that proved it, and transmitted to every rebellion frequency I could find. Then I ran, because the facility was coming apart around me, because orbital bombardment had begun, because the Empire was willing to destroy its own installation rather than let the rebellion capture it. I reached my shuttle just as a turbo laser strike vaporized the landing pad behind me, launched into a space battle that chewed up ships like a meat grinder, took damage from 3 different directions, and made a desperate jump to hyperspace with my ship screaming and half my systems failing. That was 6 hours ago. The jump calculations were flawed. I was too rushed, too damaged, didn't have time for the precision that had defined my career. I emerged from hyperspace in the wrong location with my hyperdrive destroyed and my ship venting atmosphere. I crawled into this escape pod, ejected from the dying shuttle, and now I'm drifting in interstellar space with no nearby systems and no realistic hope of rescue. My oxygen will run out in approximately 43 minutes by my calculations, which are still precise even if everything else has failed. I don't know if my transmission reached anyone who matters, don't know if the rebellion received it, if they'll be able to use it, if my year of research and Mira's death will change anything about the Empire's systematic erasure of reality. I don't know if I accomplished anything except getting the woman I loved killed and dying myself in an escape pod in the middle of nowhere. The numbers don't lie, my father said, but the truth is that sometimes the numbers don't matter either. Sometimes all your precision and calculation and careful documentation means nothing against an empire willing to rewrite mathematics itself in service to its lies. I keep thinking about Mira, about the coordinates we couldn't process, about my parents disappearing in the night. I think about all the worlds erased from the charts, the populations unmade, the careful violence of systems designed to make atrocity mathematically impossible to prove. I think about how I devoted my life to navigation, to calculating routes through the darkness, and how I failed to see that the Empire had built darkness into the navigation system itself, had corrupted the fundamental mathematics I trusted more than anything. The oxygen sensor is reading 22 minutes remaining. My fingers are trembling from carbon dioxide buildup. I can taste blood where I bit my tongue during the ejection. The escape pod smells like fear and burnt electronics, and the coppery scent of my own blood from injuries I hadn't noticed until now. Outside the viewport, stars shine with absolute clarity, light that left them years or decades or centuries ago, traveling through the void to reach my eyes in these final moments. I calculated so many journeys in my career, plotted courses for star destroyers and supply convoys and troop transports, sent ships across the galaxy with precision and pride. How many of those journeys ended in atrocity? How many coordinates I calculated led to the erasure I documented? The mathematics was clean and elegant, but I'd been computing death and erasure all along, had been complicit in every crime committed at destinations I'd navigated to with such meticulous accuracy. Mira understood that before I did, understood that being part of the machine meant bearing responsibility for what the machine did, regardless of how pure your calculations or how precise your work. She died trying to expose the coordinates that couldn't be processed, the destinations that officially didn't exist, the systematic erasure that kept the Empire's version of reality consistent. She died believing that information could matter, that truth could change things, that someone would care about the worlds unmade and the populations erased. I hope she was right. I hope my transmission reached the rebellion. Hope they can use the evidence I compiled. Hope the coordinates I spent years documenting will help them find the facilities like Starhawk, rescue the people being erased, expose the Empire's reality manipulation for what it is. But hope requires believing in something beyond the mathematics, requires faith that human beings will act on truth, even when power demands they ignore it. I spent my life trusting numbers more than people, and now, dying alone in this pod, I realize that was the fundamental error. Mathematics can describe reality, but only people can change it. The oxygen sensor reads 11 minutes. My vision is starting to blur, thoughts becoming difficult to maintain coherently. I keep seeing Mira falling, keep smelling the ozone of blaster fire, keep tasting the blood on her lips when she told me to go, to make it matter. I keep seeing my parents disappearing into ISB custody, my father's last words about numbers not lying, the truth that got them killed just as surely as it's killing me now. I'm cold despite the life support still functioning. My hands have stopped trembling, not from calmness but from oxygen deprivation affecting my nervous system. I can feel my heartbeat slowing, my thoughts becoming fragmented. Outside the viewport, the stars continue their ancient motion, following trajectories calculated by mathematics far more fundamental than anything humans have devised. The galaxy doesn't care about my calculations or my discoveries or my death. It simply exists, indifferent to whether we map it accurately or build our empires on carefully maintained lies. 5 minutes, maybe less. The sensor might be optimistic about oxygen consumption rates. I'm finding it hard to focus, hard to maintain the precision of thought that defined my life. I keep drifting into memories. My mother's tea, my father's pride when I solved a complex equation, Mira's hand in mine in stolen moments between duty shifts, Commander Thrin's voice explaining that sometimes you have to feel navigation rather than just calculate it. I never understood what he meant. I never developed the intuition to supplement my mathematics. I trusted numbers absolutely, and the numbers were correct but incomplete, accurate but inadequate. The coordinates that Imperial Nav systems couldn't process were the truth the Empire needed to hide, destinations that existed in reality but not in official records, locations where atrocity was committed with systematic precision, worlds erased from the map to prevent their suffering from being calculated, documented, proven. I spent my career navigating around those erasures, plotting courses that respected the Empire's version of reality, calculating journeys that avoided acknowledging the destinations we'd been forbidden to see. I was a navigator who only knew half the map, and I mistook that incomplete information for complete knowledge. 2 minutes. My chest hurts. My vision has narrowed to a tunnel. I can barely feel my extremities. The cold is absolute now, not just physical but existential, the realization that I'm going to die without knowing if anything I did mattered, if Mira's sacrifice achieved anything, if the coordinates I documented will help anyone or just be another set of data points floating in the void. I hope the rebellion received my transmission. I hope someone plots courses to the destinations I mapped, rescues the people being erased, exposes the Empire's reality manipulation. I hope my parents would understand that I spent my life serving the system that killed them before finally recognizing what I was part of. I hope Mira forgives me for running, for surviving her by these few days, for being too much a coward to die with her in that corridor. The stars are fading, not because they're going out, but because I am. The mathematics of my death is straightforward. Oxygen depletion leading to hypoxia, leading to loss of consciousness, leading to cardiac arrest, leading to brain death. Clean, precise, elegant in its simplicity. Numbers don't lie, my father said. He was right. They don't lie. They just don't tell you the things that matter most, the human costs and moral failures that exist between the calculations, the erasures we build into our systems and call them features rather than crimes. I'm sorry, Mira. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I took too long to see what you saw immediately. I'm sorry I wasted years serving the machine before finally trying to break it. I'm sorry. The oxygen sensor has stopped beeping. The mathematics say I have seconds left. The stars are beautiful. The void is infinite. The coordinates I couldn't process were always there, hidden in the gaps between what the Empire allowed me to see and what actually existed. And I'm dying without knowing if mapping those gaps will help anyone or just add one more erasure to the Empire's systematic rewriting of reality. Numbers don't lie, but sometimes the truth they tell isn't enough to save anyone. The truth. The Empire didn't just control territory, it controlled reality itself, corrupting the fundamental mathematics of navigation to erase destinations it wanted hidden, populations it wanted unmade, atrocities it wanted mathematically impossible to prove. I spent my life as a navigator trusting numbers absolutely, believing precision and accuracy were sufficient. And I failed to understand that incomplete information presented as complete is the most effective lie. The coordinates Imperial Nav systems couldn't process were the truth they needed to hide, and I became complicit in that hiding by calculating routes that respected their erasures. Mira died trying to expose what I'd been too blind to see, that being part of the machine means bearing responsibility for what it does, that clean mathematics can facilitate dirty crimes, that order built on systematic erasure is just tyranny with better documentation. I transmitted everything I'd learned to the rebellion before dying in this pod, and I hope they use it to find the worlds unmade and the people erased. But hope requires faith I never developed. Numbers don't lie, my father said, but the truth is that numbers alone aren't enough. Sometimes the most important truths exist in the gaps between calculations, in the destinations we're forbidden to acknowledge, in the human costs that resist mathematical description. I die without knowing if I mattered, if Mira's sacrifice achieved anything, if incomplete redemption counts as redemption at all. The stars are fading, the oxygen is gone, the coordinates remain scattered through the transmission I sent into the void, waiting for someone to plot courses to destinations that officially don't exist and rescue people the Empire has tried to erase from mathematics itself.